Hey guys, JCK RGB here. So photography and video has always been a really big passion of mine, as you've probably noticed if you've been subscribed to my channel for a while. I've done a few different videos on the subject before. When new iPhones get announced, it's pretty much always their cameras that grab my attention and get me the most excited. They've been getting really good in recent years, so good in fact that people are using them for full-on photo shoots or making entire films on them or music videos. For a lot of people, their smartphone is probably the best camera that they own. Having a dedicated device for photography or video just isn't as common as it used to be. Apple likes to talk a lot about how pro their phones are, especially when it comes to their cameras. But the camera app itself, I think, is not so pro, particularly when it comes to shooting video. It's fine for casual, everyday shooting when you just want to grab a quick shot of your pet or a nice landscape, but it lacks some of the finer controls you'll need if you're wanting to get more into that pro level with your photography and video. So with today's video, I wanted to share with you the best and my favourite third-party camera apps that I like to shoot with. Apps that really unlock the full potential of the cameras. First, we'll take a quick look at the native camera app and see what's missing, and then we'll get into some third-party apps. The built-in app has some great features covering the essentials you'll need for everyday photos and videos, with a few additional modes for things like panoramas, time-lapses, and shooting in slow-mo. It has some basic controls like tap to focus and a slider to change your exposure, both of which can be locked by holding your finger down for a couple of seconds. But that's about as far as it goes really. It's missing things like being able to set and lock your white balance. You don't want your colour shifting while you're in the middle of shooting a scene, for example. The same goes for setting and locking your ISO and shutter speed. If you want your footage to look smoother and more cinematic, you want to be following something called the 180-degree shutter rule, which basically means setting your shutter speed to double your frame rate. I have covered this in detail recently in my video all about using ND filters with your phone, so go and check that out if you're interested in learning more. There's also no manual focus controls for adjusting focus while filming, apart from tap to focus, which might knock or jolt your camera. And sometimes you need that little bit extra control, maybe to do a nice pull focus from something in the foreground to something in the background or vice versa. But it's not just people wanting to go out and make short films and things that would benefit from having these controls. You might just be wanting to shoot some footage on a trip or when traveling to put together into like a little narrative video for later. Or maybe you're wanting to learn more about cinematography and shooting video, and the only camera that you currently have access to is the one on your phone, which I think is a great way to start out if you have an app that lets you experiment and play around with the same manual controls you'd also find on more professional cameras. Thankfully, there are a load of third-party apps you can use instead, some just for photography, some just for video, or some that do both, that include all of these missing features and more. So let's take a look now at the first app, the Pro Camera app by Moment. And this is one that you will have seen me use a lot on the channel before. The app has modes for photos and videos, and I really like it for a few different reasons. It gives you full manual control for setting and locking your shutter speed, your ISO, which generally you want to keep as low as you can to keep your image looking clean and less noisy, full manual focus control with a slider to adjust while filming, and controls for setting your white balance. In the settings, there's a bunch of useful toggles for things like focus peaking, showing you where the focal plane is and what's currently in focus outlined in green, zebras for highlight and shadow clipping shown in blue and red, so you can make sure that you're not too over or underexposed, and a toggle for a histogram, again to help you really nail your exposure. You can also manually force the app to shoot with either the wide, ultra-wide or telephoto cameras. One of the quirks with the native camera app is that if you're shooting in low light using, say, the telephoto, the app might decide to switch over to the wide camera instead, which has better low light performance, and it will crop in to match the focal length of the telly, resulting in a lower resolution cropped image. You could test this for yourself as well by covering the telly camera with your finger, and you won't be able to see your finger blocking the camera even though the telephoto is still shown as active in the UI. This is one of those cases where Apple is trying to take control of the user's experience to get a better resulting image in low light, for example, but sometimes it might not always be what you want the camera app to do on its own. This also ties into when you're shooting with any sort of lens attachments like these here made by Moment. Mounting these over the iPhone's cameras when using the native camera app can sometimes confuse it, and it will sort of try to switch to a different camera, and it just doesn't always work as you intend it to. The Moment app lets you lock in your camera selection, and you can also tell it which specific lens you're using, and that data gets saved with the image for later reference. If you're shooting with one of their anamorphics, you can also use the app to automatically de-squeeze the image in the live view to help you with your framing and composition, and have the image or video saved with the de-squeezing effect applied so that you don't have to do it yourself in post. Lastly, in video mode you can choose a couple of colour profiles aside from the default including flat and log. Now these aren't true colour profiles that improve dynamic range of the footage, it is still only 8-bit. They're more like log effect filters which act as a global contrast adjustment, but nonetheless if you like that desaturated cinematic look straight out of camera, you can just shoot with these and then tweak the look a little bit in post. In the app settings you can also increase the shooting bitrate up to 100 megabytes a second. This will increase file sizes, but you will also retain some more detail in your footage compared to shooting in standard. There's also a few settings for sound recording, where you can force which mic to record from, or turn on your audio levels in the live view, so that you can monitor your audio while shooting, which is really a must if you're doing anything where you're capturing sound. The Pro Camera app is great at filling in pretty much every feature gap that the native app doesn't have. But one thing that it can't do yet that the native camera can, is shooting in 10-bit Dolby Vision HDR. Apple introduced this last year with the 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max, and for those that don't know, HDR stands for High Dynamic Range, and basically means that video shot in this format will have better contrast, better colour accuracy, and just look better overall. And that leads me nicely onto the next app that I want to show you, which is Filmic Pro. Filmic Pro is just for shooting video, there's no photography mode, but it does have all the same manual controls for video that we saw in the Pro Camera app, albeit with some slightly different implementations. And to top it off, it also supports shooting in Dolby Vision HDR. It's also available on the Google Play Store for any Android users watching. The UI can be a little bit confusing and daunting at first, but it's a lot simpler than it looks once you've had some time to play around with it. Shutter speed and focus are controlled by on-screen dials on the left and right sides of the screen. Zebras for exposure and focus are available under the Analytics menu, but unfortunately you can't use these while shooting in Dolby Vision, the button just disappears. I'm guessing it's just too much for the iPhone to process all at once at the moment, at least for me here using a 12 Pro Max. You can of course set your white balance to and force which camera to shoot with, and there's a couple of different anamorphic de-squeeze settings for 1.33 anamorphics like Moments, or 1.55 anamorphics like the one made by Beast Grip. It also has a couple of more advanced features over Moments Pro Camera, like timecode support to sync up your footage in post if you're shooting with multiple iPhones at once, and a clean HDMI out for audio and video that lets you monitor your live view on an external display without getting any of the app's UI in the way. You can also set guides for a bunch of different aspect ratios, or have the app crop the footage down to save you from having to do it later. Filters are also available in the app as separate in-app purchases. I've not used these personally yet, but it's nice to have some options for some baked-in looks. One thing that I really like is the way that it handles your footage files after shooting. You can have it save these directly to the camera roll, but I actually like to turn this off so that it only saves the files inside the app's built-in file library. This way it keeps all of my footage in one place, and I don't end up accidentally filling up my iCloud storage with really big high bitrate files, which again can go up to 100 megabytes a second when set to Filmic Extreme. Okay, next up is the Halide app. This app is just a photography app, it doesn't offer any video modes, but it has got some nice unique features over both the native camera and Pro Camera apps. As expected, it has all the usual pro photography features, including focus peaking and zebras for highlights and shadows, and manual controls for ISO and shutter by using the whole viewfinder as a massive gesture area, which I really like. You can swipe up and down to set the shutter speed, and left and right to set the ISO. It does only have 4 preset white balance settings with no way to dial in an exact colour temperature, but being a photography only app, the 4 presets cover pretty much the main shooting conditions, and the built-in auto white balance is really good anyway. I often just use that. One feature that I really like is that you can customize and rearrange the app's UI to suit your needs. Some buttons are hidden under this little slide out tray, but if you find that you don't really toggle the histogram on and off, but you often take a lot of timed photos, You can swap them out here or just rearrange their order completely. You can also take portrait mode photos in the app, which you can't do yet with the Moment app. And these photos are fully compatible with all of Apple's editing tools for portrait photos in the Photos app. So you can go in and change the f-stop to adjust the amount of background blur, or turn it off entirely if you change your mind after shooting. You can also view portrait mode photos in a special AR view inside the Halide app, which is a bit trippy and really matrixy, but it's really cool to see them in this new perspective. One small feature that I really like is the square level guide in the viewfinder that helps you keep your photos level. When tilting your phone down into a top-down view, this morphs into 2 circles, so you can really get your leveling spot on. A feature that I've been playing around with a lot lately is the recently added macro mode. And this isn't just for new iPhone 13s that just got a new macro mode using their updated cameras. Halide's macro mode is compatible with any iPhone. You can enable it by going into manual focus mode and then tapping on the flower icon, and it works by automatically selecting the best camera for the current shot based on its minimum focal distance and cropping the image in to getting close. If you have an iPhone 8 or later, it also uses some fancy neural engine processing to upscale the image into the final 4K image. Now the results are of course not going to be as good as when using a camera designed for macro photography, like that on the 13, but I have to say I'm pretty impressed with it. You can choose between a 1, 2 or 3 times crop level, and I've managed to capture some really detailed shots with it so far, even on my non-macro 12 Pro Max. Comparing it to Moment's macro lens attachment, you can't get as close to your subject as that lens has a 10 times magnification. But your focus using that is fixed. So sometimes it's a little restrictive and too close, and you can't move away from your subject even if you wanted. You'll also notice a really big difference in the depth of field between them. It's really shallow on the Moment macro and kind of difficult getting all of the subject in focus at once. Overall, it's a nice feature to have for those sticking with their older iPhones for a little bit longer. Lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about Spectre, another app from the developers of Halide. Spectre is all about long exposure photography. You can use it to take a photo over a number of seconds and automatically merge them into one, which leads to a couple of pretty cool effects. You can use it to automatically remove moving people or objects from busy places, or when using it at night, the AI scene detection switches on to draw these beautiful light trails across the image. It's really cool. The dark UI is really simply laid out. In the bottom right, there's a dial to set the length of the exposure time between 3 and 9 seconds. Centered under the live view is a guide showing you how steady your phone is. And you don't have to use a tripod or anything for the app, you can just shoot handheld, and it will automatically stabilize your hand's movements. Of course though, the more steady you are, the better the end results. Photos taken in Spectre are saved as live photos too. So when you hold your finger down on them and they come to life, you can see the objects disappear or the light trails being drawn. It's really cool. So those have been my favourite photography and video apps. I love the Moment app for its versatility of having photo and video modes, and its support for Moment lenses like the Anamorphic. Filmic Pro has great manual controls and also supports Dolby Vision HDR, and I really like how it handles my video files separately from my camera roll. Halide has a beautifully simple yet powerful interface for stills photography. Its new macro mode means I can get some pretty decent macro shots on the go when I don't have my macro lens with me. Spectre is a little more specialised. I've not been using it for very long, but I can't wait to experiment with it in some more crowded places, or at night to get some of those nice light trails. And then of course there's the native camera. While it does lack some of those manual controls, it's still a great point and shoot app for casual use. And I am hoping that it does get some sort of Pro Mode update in the future. Plus it has its own unique features that make it well worth using, like Smart HDR and Night Mode for really great night photography, and live photos, which I really love looking back at old photos and seeing those memories come to life. Of course there's loads of other third-party camera apps out there, so if there's one that you love and I've missed it and you think I should check it out, then let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a like, it really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to see more tech content from myself, then hit subscribe and the bell and stick around for more. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.